So this is our third in a series, communication design lecture series that we're piloting this semester. And then we're going to continue to do so, not piloting, but like properly running it, starting from next semester. So please make sure you read your emails when we send out the emails to come here. So today we have Link by Air. Link by Air is a design and technology firm. They integrate strategy, user experience, interaction, and visual design, and software development to create design systems and build digital products that grow with their institutions. Their approach to creativity and context embraces flexibility, agility, and evolution as both design and strategic values. So we have here today two founders of Link by Air, Tamara and Dan. Also Eric Nyland, who's staff, and Chris Wohlfeld is also here, and Jack Rigger, the studio intern, who's the Parsons, is currently at Parsons. So I'll pass on the mic. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Arun. We are very excited to be here, and first of all, we'd like to thank Arun and Brendan and Pascal and Juliet and Parsons for inviting us. I'm Tamara Malatik. I'm a founder and partner at Link by Air. Dan is the other founder and partner, and Eric Nyland is our 25% designer, 25% art director, 50% developer, 25% strategist. So he's an uber example of the fact that a few people at Link by Air actually wear different hats. And this integration of different roles and collaborations between our designers and developers is a very important feature, a characteristic of our studio, and we will talk about it more shortly during the lecture. This is where we are currently located, in Denver. We do all kinds of design projects, from books to apps. In the past, we worked at Pentagram, 2x4, MoMA, MCA, Chicago, on identity, signage, exhibitions. As Link by Air, we've been focusing on designing and programming main websites for cultural and educational institutions. I wanted to show you our partial client list. All right, sorry, oh, there it is, okay. So you can see here that we work with a lot of museums and universities. And I will tell you a little bit more about how Dan and I met and started our studio. And while I'm talking about that, I'll just play a reel of our work websites, mostly websites. So Dan and I have both been, and also I'm gonna tell you guys that both Dan and I have been teaching for over 10 years now, so teaching is very important for our practice as well. And Eric is currently teaching a core interaction class here and has taught other classes previously. And at our studio, about half of the people in the studio teach, and we are always very supportive of people wanting to teach. Dan and I met in grad school, and we started collaborating there. Interaction design classes were just being introduced into our program when we were students. And we were both very excited about the possibilities that they brought to us as designers. Most of the themes that we became interested in at school have also played a big part in our practice. And some of these themes we will talk about tonight, such as designing for change. How do you design for a system that will change in the future? User participation. How do you create design that allows for and grows through user participation? And user interfaces, how do we create interfaces inspired by the world around us and that entice people to create?
So I think one of the things that makes Link by Ear really unique is that we really see websites as living organisms. So it's really different than print design, where you send something off to a printer and that's sort of the end of the life of the project. For all the things that we work on tend to be really ongoing relationships, and they require care and attention. And I think in general we work on projects that have lots of content, so they're not websites that you put up once and then they're done. They're something that changes and grows over time. So to sort of give you a sense of what we do, before a project starts, we'll interview, we'll do research, we'll develop our views, we'll start to establish strategic goals, and so we have this long phase of work that begins even before we start designing. Then during the actual design phase, we do things like user testing, we create prototypes, we start to establish the design system, and finally we code and actually enter content. But really it doesn't end there at all. The work that we do after includes all sorts of support for the website in terms of coding, adding new features, and there's this concept of continually iterating and improving the site over time. So it's relationships that go on for years. They're really ongoing relationships.
And one of the things we've sort of really tried to get better at is understanding our sites, not only in terms of what they look like, but also in terms of how they perform. So, if it's a museum, or people buying tickets and memberships, through the website, and or if it's a bookstore, we work for a nonprofit bookstore in the city, and they need to hit a sales goal, and they also their staff needs to bring a certain number of books into the system, like every day, so every second matters, and so we do try to look at is the site helping our clients meet those goals, and if not, what can we do to tweak the design or the user experience or the staff experience to help them meet those goals better from month to month, and that's one way in which our sites keep changing.
This slide is showing the Whitney website during and after the launch, so it kind of gives this feel of sort of an organism. And these show the pages changing as content is added to the site. So you can see it's organized by different sections of the website, and sort of you have this sense of this living thing that lots of people are working on.
I think that's just 40 pages, among hundreds within the site. And so you saw it growing as everybody got ready to the launch, and then the launch is kind of this minor little moment when the switches flip, and then it continues to evolve after that for many more years.
This shows content entry on the site over time, so you can see it's also not just us that are involved in creating and maintaining it. On the left are a list of people who have entered content on the site. Link by Ear is one name among many, so it does have this quality of this living thing that requires all these people to maintain and interact with it. And this just shows that divided by different parts of the museum, so different parts of the organization.
So that sort of is one way of thinking about change and sort of trying to build things that are alive, so that something could have a life over years and many people can contribute to it. I'm just going to show some smaller interactions now, like not a website of hundreds or thousands of pages, but that still sort of deal with the idea of kind of empowering users or inviting users to make something out of nothing. This is an app called Bug that folks and learners can use to turn color into sound. We made sort of a few trailers, which are also kind of trailers for Link by Ear in a way. Bug is sort of the brainchild of two designers and developers in our studio at the time, Laurel Schultz and Jeffrey Scudder. This is a screensaver, a kind of arts collective called Parallelogram invited us to make a piece of like net art for them, and so we sort of brought back the screensavers from the 90s and 2000s and made an aquarium. The fish get bigger every day actually, so they grow each night at midnight, and so they kind of overlap each other more and more. If you watch long enough, you'll see some special fish. You may have saw one swim by. And they get more and more crowded if you make your browser smaller, of course, so they're sort of responding to their context and in their own way. These are digital mirrors we did at a Soho store as a subcontractor to 2x4. And so there's like 11 different mirrors that you encountered as you move through the store. Each one transforms your reflection in a different way, just to make shopping a little more surprising or glam or something like that. This is a project that we worked on for years, like for 20 years actually, called Midnight Madness. And Midnight Madness is it's a big urban game, or it was a big urban game that occurred like every year, every couple of years. A few hundred people would gather at a starting point somewhere in the city in the middle of the night at a location that was announced that day. And they were organized into teams, and each team was given a puzzle. And if you could solve and our job was to design the puzzles. Like what do they look like, these posters that would be around the city, or objects, or things hidden in cracks or in drain pipes.
And the flow of the game.
And the flow of the game. So the solution to a puzzle would lead you somewhere else in the city where you would find another puzzle, which would lead you somewhere else, and you didn't know where the finish line was until you got there sometime the next day. This is the game, the diagram. As years went on, things got less and less linear, and you would be given like 3 puzzles at the same time, which then would lead you on 3 paths, which would diverge and then converge, and there would be synchronous elements like a box that would invite everybody to go to a certain pier at 10 p.m. And so things would like converge that way. And so these created pretty sort of complicated user journeys, which is a theme that we want to come back to a few times today. And lots of chaos. Things would not work. Stuff we like hung off a pier to be dangling in the water, the string would break and it falls to the bottom of the river. But of course, things are not designed to work easily in a game like this. If the puzzles are too easy, then the game is no fun at all. So most users spend a lot of the night being frustrated and unhappy and rained on, and many users spend a lot of the night feeling great joy. And our job was to sort of organize this. And so Midnight Madness would have, sort of an impact on the neighborhoods that it took place in for that one night. Strange things would be going on in those parts of the city. We couldn't always see those things because we would be hidden out in like Game HQ, in a hotel room or once like an RV somewhere, sort of taking phone calls from frustrated gamers and kind of helping things move forward. But sometimes we would sneak out and follow people around and try not to give away where anything is, but still get to see what is happening in the city. That experience turns out to be very similar to the experience of running a website, actually, where you really can't see what users are doing. You have this kind of shadow of it by watching analytics. And sometimes maybe you'll do some user testing and look over people's shoulders while they use your site and really get to see how the site is working and not working. And that is a real privilege. These are just a couple examples of puzzles in Midnight Madness. So sometimes there were these sort of physical sculptures. A lot of times they took advantage of really neat places in the city, like the Daily News building with this giant creaky globe that was actually motorized and kind of turned around. We had many collaborators, including this amazing guy, Matt Leibowitz, whose brainchild this whole thing really is. And in the sort of second half of Midnight Madness's life, in the late 2000s, or in the 2010s, it became a fundraiser actually, and raised millions of dollars for a charity called Good Shepherd Services. This project, some of you guys might be familiar with, is an app called Shrub. You draw with the world around you, you paint with the world around you. It's just like waiting for the subway. So every brush stroke is a new photograph, and you then reveal it with your finger. And it's also really easy to share what you make. You just tap with 2 fingers, and you can send a text message to someone with your painting, and that's what you're seeing in the corners here as like examples. And so we love to get images of what people make with our stuff. And that, in a way, is kind of similar to watching staff at a museum build out pages of a website. It's a real honor to be surprised by what people make with your tools, and that's often sort of success criteria for us and a fun part of working in our studio. So those are a few projects that sort of, in different ways, like kind of almost start with zero and let people make stuff using their world or using the situation around them. I mentioned the bookstore Printed Matter, which is the world's biggest distributor of artist books and an important cultural institution in New York since the 1970s. We've kind of designed their website and have been maintaining it and enhancing it for a few years. And we just wanted to show one feature of it, which lets users make their own tables of books. So this is just one part of the site. But it lets any user of the site curate their own group of books. And so Printed Matter uses it, friends of Printed Matter uses it, and also like everyday people use it. Publishers also use it. One thing that's special about Printed Matter is that artists can sell their own books on consignment through Printed Matter. So Printed Matter has always been a sort of a social network. What I wanted to show you guys is that, in a way, this idea about users making so-called tables is inspired by the physical space in Printed Matter, which is also tables. And that is often a factor that drives our work, is the physical places that our work is used in or that our work is about. So it's both this user experience and sort of functional idea of a social network or being able to curate your own stuff, and it's also like an aesthetic or situational idea of just what is that place like when you visit it, when you look at it, or when you spend some time there. Last year we launched a project for the Hirshhorn Museum, which is the Modern and Contemporary Art Museum at the Smithsonian in Washington, called the Hirshhorn Eye, and it is a mobile website where when you go, it has an URL, hi.si.edu, and once you're on it, you just kind of can walk around the galleries and sort of wave your phone past paintings and sculptures, and if it recognizes something, then usually the artist starts talking back to you as a video about the work that she made, and or about the process. This was the director's, the idea of the director of the museum, and one of the reasons why she was really pushing for it was because contemporary art can be intimidating, and in order to create a sort of inclusive visitor experience, they could work for lots of different kinds of people from lots of different kinds of demographics, and tourists walking off the mall in Washington. It's a free museum, you just kind of walk right in, to show that an artist might look like you, and also to hear directly from an artist about what he or she was thinking when they made the work, and often that's also in different languages, is a really powerful and accessible way to connect people to art who are not necessarily like hardcore contemporary art fans like we might or might not be. And that's something we've been, that's also been a sort of a big theme in our work for the last couple of years, is making sure that we're not prejudging how people approach our clients or our work. So one part of this project was really spending a lot of time with users, and we very quickly prototyped a version of this. It didn't really look like what you see here. Didn't exactly work like this, and watched users use it, and then we made a lot of changes from talking to those users, but basically from seeing what was frustrating and where users got confused. And we did that a few times with lots of different kinds of users. including users with limited sight, which is a pretty interesting application for a blind user in museum. The Hirshhorn Museum famously has all the windows on the inside, and I think it kind of looks like an eye, and that's why we pushed for it to be called the Hirshhorn Eye. And I think one of the things we try to think about when sort of given that challenge from the director is like, how do we make this about this place? And so the design is this very simple viewfinder where you're just kind of looking through this aperture as you might do when you're looking across that courtyard from the Hirshhorn Museum. The ironic thing is that the exhibition that it launched with was all like minimalist and conceptual art. So for this very first image recognition application, the things it was trying to recognize were like black squares and transparent cubes, which works a little bit better than you would think, but is fraught with issues. And but it does work quite well, and it works for sculpture too. One thing we learned really early on from our research and from working with users is that it's going to be really hard to explain to people you can only use this website when you're at the Hirshhorn. And but we didn't want to ask for location permission, which can seem intrusive. And so, like when that pop-up comes on your phone, so we came up with this solution where we just, when you open this, when you go here, just ask you if you're at the Hirshhorn right now. And if you say no, it gives you one experience, which is sort of not what I just showed, and it explains to you what the app is about. And if you say yes, then you see what I just showed you. And that idea, that very simple idea, we've come back to more recently, and I'll talk about that at the end. So often our interfaces and our identities are really inspired by the world around them. And we try to sort of take that world and use it to, or take those interfaces and use those interfaces to add meaning back to those physical places where people are engaging with our clients, whether that's buying a physical book that you can hold in your hands, or being in a physical place and looking at real art. We see our interfaces as interfaces between people and other things in the real world.
So I'll talk briefly about our studio and show through a set of images, hopefully how we developed and grew, and also show some people that worked previously at Link by Air. We had some really amazing designers, programmers, people work at Link by Air, and really all of them left a considerable mark on our practice. And some of them you will recognize, some of them might have been your teachers, or you know them from
Cheer every time you see a Parsons lecture.
So this is currently the group of people that work at Link by Air. Pretty much half of them are developers and half of them are designers, with some both. So we are 11, including our intern, Jack, who's a student at Parsons. So this was our very first studio where everything started, a very small room in Chinatown on East Broadway. Laurel Schultz and Mary Borges, and we even managed to cram a group of visitors from Holland a couple of times and give lectures, and once the group was so large that we had to open the door and they were in the hallway.
I feel like space constraints are like a thing here at Parsons, but it could be worse.
Brian Watterson, that some of you might know. And then this was our second place that we shared a common name, Ken and Yoonjae, they're sitting in the back. Brandon, crosspath as well. I don't know if you've heard of Suki and Min Choi, really amazing designers from Seoul, South Korea, and great friends and colleagues and collaborators of ours. I highly recommend you check out their work if you're not familiar. Oh yeah, we are testing here, we're playing Microsoft Kinect here. Andrew Schwartz, and this was then our third space, Christie Street, on the 4th floor, watching a transit of Venus, Brian Walterson, and this is Halloween at Linklater.
Back to the elephant in a second.
This is Dylan Fisher. Nika and Dylan Fisher, who also teach here, met actually at Linklater, and this is them collaborating on making the clue for Midnight Madness.
Met and got married.
Yeah. And this is like Midnight Madness starting in our small office, and this is Midnight Madness finishing in our office.
It's Matt, who I mentioned.
And Matt Leibowitz, who we then mentioned earlier, the conceptor of Midnight Madness, and an amazing engineer. And then this is our 4th place on the 8th floor of Christie Street, and finally our newest space in Denver, where we are now. And here, this diagram kind of shows you how closely our developers and designers sit to each other. They just have to basically rotate their chairs and talk and collaborate. This is, so Laurel Schultz started this by assigning avatars to everyone who passed through our studio for use in Slack, UTrack, and other tools that we use in the office. So here you can see the list of people who have worked with us, and these are the icons to be used.
It's called the barn.
It's called the barn, yes. And then we use Slack heavily. I don't know how much you can see here on the left, but that's basically the list of our ongoing projects, whether they're current projects or support projects. Also a couple of general channels, music channel, lunch channel. And then we also have kind of group channels. And this one is actually showing, I don't know if you can see it, it's Humex support. Humex is a museum in Mexico City that we are working with, that we developed their main website, and now we are doing support.
So Eric is kind of talking about the flow of a website that lives. This is literally what that looks like as a series of utterances where sometime after the launch, one morning, Adriana in Mexico City is like, can you improve this or fix this?
Right. And then you have here, like there's Cole and Eric talking to Adriana, and it's like a designer and developer. We usually have both of them dedicated to each client channel, one designer and one developer.
This is UTrack. It's an issue tracking program. I'm going to put my developer hat on for a minute. So anytime there's sort of issues with the website, the client creates these tickets, and this is how we keep track of the site across time. So this is how we interact with the client based on any kind of problems they're having with the site.
And we'll also use this system often just internally too before the project launches to manage all the different pieces of it, because often it will be more than one developer and more than one designer working on the project when it's really at its peak before the launch. And this also is a sort of arrow of time where those columns are like sort of open, in progress, and closed, and or they can be. And so that's the life of a little bit of a project as it moves from like a to-do to in progress to done or live on the site. This is just lately we've been doing a lot of video conferences. It's another way of sort of seeing our communication. Laurel, when she left Link by Air after like 5 years, made us this set of speculative T-shirts in which everybody wears someone else's picture and a different person's name at Link by Air, and so that idea of a studio as a set of interconnected, overlapping roles that maybe has come through and how we've been talking about our process or what life is like at Linkfire, and also just like kind of, I hope it's okay if we talk over each other a little bit to you. And also just, as one thing that I've really learned as we've kind of grown from like a partnership of just the two of us to, a small studio of 11 people, is that people do not stay in the studio forever. And so each person is kind of bringing their own perspective on design or development or both, and kind of altering the studio's approach with that perspective, but also, of course, like absorbing the story to date and Linkfire's approach to date, and that also affects how each person is making stuff and thinking while they're in the studio. When people move on, they kind of leave this mark behind, and they've kind of changed the studio as well. So just like the sites that we make are these kind of living organisms, our studio is this mutating thing that it's not random, but it's also not stable. It's it changes based on the clients that we're working with and experiences that we've had, and also the people that that comprise the studio over time. So in our output, and this is a slide we show the clients, in our output, but also in our studio process, time and change are really sort of key factors in how we think about design, and I think our sort of kind of intense focus on that makes us a little bit different from other design firms. We really sort of think about creating resiliency when we design. We're kind of making like a kit of parts for our clients, often not a finished thing. We're creating building blocks that they can recombine on their own and with us as time goes by to make new things. And that's true for like our smallest projects and very much for our biggest projects. So Eric's going to talk about ICALA, and when we think about identity, like brand, we often try to sort of back that out from user experience. And often we're starting with digital, we're starting with a website, and we're starting with strategy, like figuring out what problems need to be solved for that client, as well as day-to-day business needs, like how can someone at Printed Matter input 50 new artist books into their system in an hour, or what is an organization's mission. So all of that stuff sort of, I think, really informs how we think about visual design, how we think about form. We don't necessarily start with the surface, but the surface is really important.
So I'm going to walk you through a project that we did about 2 years ago. It's for an art institution in LA called the Institute of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, ICALA. And I think what was exciting about this is one of a few projects that were really about launching an institution from the ground up. So it had previously been called the Santa Monica Museum. They moved to downtown LA, and really it was a total relaunch. So this is the front of the building. We didn't have this, none of this was in existence when we started. And like Dan mentioned, I think what's kind of unique about our identities is they oftentimes start from a digital place. So a designer named Chris Rollfeld at the studio had already designed the website.
This Chris Rollfeld.
And we were sort of now backing into the identity from that, which I think leads to a lot of interesting places. So I'm gonna actually, we thought it'd be interesting to walk you through at least a small excerpt of this document. So we really start with the site visit and with interviews, and we come up with sort of a set of major themes. So we came up with this idea of porousness. So it was an institution that's moving into a very heterogeneous place, and we wanted to make it feel welcoming to the community, and we wanted to make it feel oriented outward, which oftentimes is not the case with a lot of the design for art institutions. So these were sort of the starting pieces. We had these renderings. We had a logo already that I'll mention in a second. We had the website that we had built, and we had this history of the place before it. So our solution was this kit of parts, and I think that it sort of echoes, we have a CMS that we built called Economy that's very modular based and leaves a lot of freedom up to a user to build their own site. And this works, an identity that works in a similar way. So we have.
Do you guys know what CMS is? A content management system. So like WordPress is a CMS. We've built our own CMS.
Yeah, and so I think that this idea of playfulness and freedom and giving a sense of authorship back to the institution is important to us. So these are sort of the core elements: the logo, the colors, the typography, and these additional shapes. We got a logo from, the logo was designed by an artist named Mark Bradford. And so I think our job was really to, he's an artist, so we were working to make that logo work as in a design context. So that became a big part of what we did. So showing what not to do with that logo became important. The color palette, I think, really contrasts what typical art institutions do. It's very colorful, it's bright, so we wanted to avoid sort of cold monotones. And really we started to show the institution how to combine these pieces. So here's how you can create a color system. And I think even this is about generosity and accessibility in a sense, because one of the only rules is to make sure that the color combinations are very legible. And in terms of typography, we wanted to work with really common everyday fonts. So we use Helvetica, or we use Arial, in Times, and we sort of saw those as sort of influenced by sort of vernacular culture of Los Angeles in general. And then in addition to that, we commissioned a redrawing of a font called DIN, which is a German font, standards font that's often used in highway signs. And that was actually the font that Mark Bradford used in the logo, so that was sort of a given. But I think we created more of an idiosyncratic cut of the font that I think lends sort of this sort of idiosyncrasy to the identity. And then all those pieces are combined, and this is a page that shows how we ask them to combine the hierarchy. So we actually borrow from web standards, so it's H1 through H5, so it's a print page, but we see it as in the same way as you're building a web page. So I think this kind of crossover between the web happens a lot. And then we have these signpost elements. So these are the shape elements, and I think we were influenced by sort of this idea of like the decorated shed, or driving through LA and seeing these strip malls and these signposts around town that all have these different shapes and different typography. And then finally, sort of this element of badges. So calling out when things are free, and using color and signage to try and bring people into the museum who otherwise not come. And I'll just click through. So now that you've seen sort of the kit, how these pieces kind of come together. This is a banner signage. These are bags for the store. So gallery guides. One goal is to have, I don't think they've gotten it there quite yet, but to have everything in English and Spanish. Letterhead that they can print themselves. It's not offset print. Art formats. This is just an interior shot of the space, so wall text, incidental signage. This is social media, so this is really the first thing that we saw them make. So this is the institution working with our identity. And then this is really what really started it. So this is the website that Chris made. And I think one of the things that's really nice about it is that it foregrounds, the part on the bottom of this screen is actually what our content management system looks like on the back end. So it takes the inside of the website and lets users see it on the front.
And that partly came from the architecture, actually. So when you enter the building, you kind of walk through or past the offices. And also a sort of big part of the museum's mission is to involve community members in like museum practice. So they offer like fellowships in the business of museums. So to sort of turn the website inside out in a similar way and sort of expose its own practice to the public seemed to make sense, or to be a way to interpret that aspect of the museum's mission and also that aspect of its architecture without literally looking at the architecture.
And then the last slide is just showing some mobile views of the site. And again, this is sort of the mobile view of the back end as the third phone.
Just quickly walk through this project because of the time constraint. We want to show you there's this and one more project. This was a very quick and fun project that we did with a friend of ours, Lana Savar from Zagreb. And she asked us to collaborate on the identity and signage for the Zagreb Dance Center. It was a small institution that was being built by pretty well-known architects there in Zagreb. I forgot the name.
3LHD.
3LHD. And there was a very interesting challenge that the institution was not, you couldn't see it from the street. There was this kind of tunnel-like passage, and then you would go through it, and then it goes into the courtyard, and then you would discover the dance center. So we just came up with this idea to kind of start with the mark, the logo on the street, run it through this tunnel-like passage, and finish it in the courtyard. It spells ZPC. And then to be as economical as possible, we decided to implement this in the same way that the traffic lines on the street are implemented. So it was actually a special traffic unit control that came and that painted this on the ground. And then we just put the name of the mark on the line. And from this, we got the very simple identity that then we implemented inside the building. This is a typeface that we took from CAD drawings that architects had. We redrew it. And so the thickness of this line inside of the building is the same as the thickness of the line outside on the ground. And this is it in space. So it is kind of like a layer of these marks that are discontinued, but that do create like a continuous invitation of flow through the building. It's almost like the users when they come there. So like a movement and visitor experience define the identity, even though there is no motion in this identity whatsoever. And this is the last project that we'll talk about. It's our newest. We just launched the website for this new cultural institution, the Shed, that I'm sure some of you have heard about.
And the really amazing brand identity and physical signage are by other means. Our role was the website, content strategy, especially for digital, and thinking about visitor experience. So the building is in Hudson Yards, and this is the sort of architect's rendering. The architect is Dillers Video and Renfro, and you're seeing like Hudson Yards, which is actually a rail yard, he covered up, and then the Shed, which is half contemporary art museum, half performance space, like theater, like New York is playing there, get built. And I really like this video that Dillers Video made, because it describes the Shed as logistics, basically, as a process of, it's like trains, it's about how do you create this really flexible building so that shell is actually on wheels, it can drive in and out to create this huge performance space or to create a plaza as needs require. So the Shed itself is like a kind of train. And then each space within the Shed is a sort of flexible space that could be used for art or performance or some hybrid things in between. And so the way that Dylan's video chose to represent that idea is as a bunch of like trains and trucks loading and unloading different kinds of things. So it's all, this building in their conception is all about motion. So sort of finish up this conversation with you guys about motion, or about how users move through things, and then about how our studio is a thing in motion. This seems like a great way to end. This is really kind of fit for us. So this is the built shed last weekend. It just opened to the public on Friday. One little bit of other news is amazing signage. The outdoor plaza is called the McCourt, and so that is signaled actually on one of these enormous steel wheels. So you can just imagine how that naming, this piece of identity signage actually spins around like a record when the shell is actually in motion. So we started with the shed about a year ago, and I'm going to show you some slides from like our early strategy and user experience with the shed. And one of the things we argued is that by being really like upfront and explicit about thinking about positioning a user's relationship to the shed as a journey, like you're at home and then you go to the shed, or you're trying to learn more about the shed, and eventually you do and you become a member. That by being really upfront about that, we're able to be welcoming, to feel welcoming, we're able to demonstrate what the shed is, and we're able to solve practical problems that the shed has. So one of the first things that we heard from the shed is that they have a really special requirement to be inclusive, like I talked about with the Hirshhorn, both because their content is kind of intimidating, and also because they are a part of Hudson Yards, which everyone kind of loves to hate. It's a billionaire enclave, and the shed is like $1 billion museum or cultural institution. And so they really wanted to figure out how they can invite lots of kinds of people in. Also, the shed is a confusing place. It literally is a transformer. And so like where the entrance is, or where your show is kind of hard to answer. It changes from time to time. Plus, it's connected with the High Line and Hudson Yards, so just navigating your way there, it's off the grid in many, many ways. So, and one of the things we learned from talking to lots of people, lots of potential visitors from all demographics before we started, or when we started, was that it can be a real source of anxiety, like understanding what you're walking into when you go to a museum or a performance. Like, what are people going to be wearing? Where are the restrooms? What's the deal with checked bags? Am I going to be standing or sitting? What happens if I photograph or live stream something? So we really, and also just needing to explain what the shed is as a new institution in New York that no one is familiar with yet. All of those challenges, were for us to try to help with and solve with this website. We felt like one way to do that is to really sort of invite users to take action, basically. And we proposed really early on that the homepage would sort of have 3 tabs, or that the website would have 3 tabs. I'm not at the shed, I'm going to the shed, and I'm at the shed. Some consultants at the shed helped us ascribe qualities or missions to these 3 tabs. Excite frictionless transaction, so when you're not at the shed. What we thought was that actually making the homepage as commercial as possible, actually, and littering it with buy tickets buttons was paradoxically, one of the ways we could be the most inviting and the most accessible, was to just make clear, we want you to come, this is how you come, this is how you get here, this is like buying a movie ticket. I'm going to the shed to help you plan your visit, basically, and figure out how you're getting there. And then at the shed to, and this is kind of what's really special about the site in a way, is a whole set of features that you use on your phone when you're there. to present your ticket, to get more information, like a digital playbill, to spend time. So I need a ticket, where's the entrance, what can I do here? And then you hopefully while you're there we can excite you about some other things that are happening at the shed, which you can learn more about at home. Or become a member and realize that this is a great thing that you want to support. So we sort of wireframe those out very early on. These are not designs. This was to sort of convince people about this idea, basically, of these three tabs or of this website that is a journey, where you see these 3 steps on your journey when you visit the website. Of course, we're on journey 2 when we're building a large site like this, and so we launched the site in December before the shed was open. This is like a year-long project in total. Version 1 is just I'm not at the shed because there wasn't a shed yet. And version 2, which launched last week, brings I'm at the shed when the shed opened. And we, in fact, needed that time to develop those additional features. The middle tab was dropped, so now in reality there's I'm not the shed and I'm out the shed. It turns out that this kind of journey is also the journey of an artist that I sort of talked about with Print and Matter. The shed commissions all of its work, so everything you see at the shed is made for the shed. And the shed is a pretty good program of working with not just major established artists, but also young local artists. And so that starts with connecting with the shed. Then you're showing work in progress, and then finally you show that work in progress typically through the website, and then finally you're presenting it in public at the shed. We developed this way of sort of storyboarding a journey, and we invented some fictional characters, like JS, a high school student. And so we sort of worked out, again, without designing a visual website, what are the activities that this user would do as he or she learns about the shed, gets excited about a performance, decides to buy a ticket, figures out how it works and how to get there. And finally is at the shed, presents his ticket, engages with the space, and we're sort of working on this idea where the digital signage is connected in some ways with the mobile site, although that idea is not real yet. Presents like a really cool interactive ticket, experiences or can engage with, can get more information about the program like while you're waiting for it to start, as you do with the playbill. And then after the visit, gets like an outreach email thanking him for his visit. Also, if he, while he was at the shed, engaged with some other stuff that while he was waiting, that other stuff can deepen his engagement with the shed the next time he visits the website. This is the website that is actually live now. So I've got tickets to, or I had tickets, if I had tickets to Soundtrack of America, it lets me know, gives me tips to plan. And so here I'm not at the shed. Anything I have tickets to is sort of automatically represented as a ticket on the homepage. And here I'm at the shed, I see my membership card, my ticket wallet, and I can present those tickets. This person has tickets to 2 different shows. I can get that playbill, I can sort of learn about amenities. Here I'm looking at the playbill for a show while I'm there. But with those big square buttons, I can also do just really basic things like figure out where are the restrooms, or where are the escalators, or the coach shed. We really paid attention to make sure that these pages give you like all the details that you would need both before your visit and when you're there, so that you understand what you're getting into. That's us. That's Tamara and me at the shed after the opening this weekend with our daughter, and so with the shell deployed. And like with Midnight Madness or lots of the other projects that we showed today at different scales, it's really satisfying to be sort of part of these kind of fluxes in the city as new institutions get built in this city and in other cities like LA. And as users move through those institutions. And there's a parallel between, you know, really trying to think about how three things: how the stuff that we make is changing and mutating over time, how the people that use our stuff, how they're in motion as they move through our sites and move through the institutions that we work with, and how our studio is evolving and growing and changing and kind of preserving a through line of some shared ideas that have been with us since grad school, but also that evolve and develop as people stay at the studio hopefully for a long time, but also new people come and the studio evolves. Thanks a lot. If you guys have questions, that would be fantastic. I know we started a little late and probably ended a little late, but that would be wonderful.
Anyone?
Maybe that's a small detail question. Is there like a paper system as well, or is it all digital?
Yeah, when you go there today, there's like paper handouts that provide orientation and stuff like that. Tickets are all digital. If you show up in the lobby and you haven't bought a ticket, I think today they will print you a ticket. But the general idea is that you'll put it on the phone when they're home.
I'm actually glad that we rescheduled the talk because now we can talk about the shed.
Right.
Yes. Previously, this talk was rescheduled. If we were doing this like a month ago, then we wouldn't be able to talk about the shed.
We would have been all going to the shed. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, what was my question? So this is about. I mean, my understanding, my reading of the story is about like the motion, right? It's in steps, and you're like it's always in progress. But at the same time, when listening to it, I was kind of curious about the beginning. How did you decide to start Link by Air? Can you tell us a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So we met in grad school and we started collaborating on different projects then. And we happened to also at some point work together at Pentagram on Lisa Strausswell's theme, the interactive theme, and we worked very well together then as well. And then Dan went to 2x4 and I went to the MoMA Museum. And we worked on MIT's website on Lisa Strausswell's theme. And after we left Pentagram, we also did a year of residency at Jan van Eyck in Maastricht, Holland. And MIT came back to us for some small side project. And basically, that was our very first Link by Air project, and we came up with a name in Maastricht. We were...
You did that map, right? It was a map.
It was a map, yeah, a campus map, and we didn't know what we should call ourselves because now suddenly we had this like project, and we looked at Archigram's book and found this phrase "linked by air" in one of their diagrams of the imaginary city, and we liked it very much. So that's how our name.
It's funny. There's so many ways to tell this story of how we decided to start, but. Yeah, that's a good one. Definitely started. Yeah. I would have told is like we went to the Jan van Eyck Academy intending to start a studio or a practice of some kind. Like that's what helped us like make a break from. Didn't really work out that way though.
Yeah.
Yeah, but definitely somewhere in there. That 1 year residency was definitely helpful in sort of giving us time to boot something up. And the thing we booted up was like pretty small. But also at that time we collaborated with Mizuki, who Tamara mentioned, on a really exhibition design called Welcome to Fuse Space Database, a neat and very crazy exhibition design. And I think that project, although it was a different team it was four of us, also kind of, that actually kicked off a lot of ideas
Yeah.
that we then wanted to pursue more. And there are lots of ways of talking about like various themes. You know, we sort of talked about this idea of motion and change today. We could also probably tell an analogous story that's like all about maps or all about databases.
And it's been how many years?
We still don't know exactly when we started. We sometimes say 2005, 6, 7, so a little bit over 10 years. I mean, we officially got the studio in 2007, 2008. That was our first office in Chinatown.
Any other questions?
The majority of the works that you guys showed us today are web-based, like either on the phone or on the computer. And my question is, do you guys ever do like printed works, or and this is more like do you see the future of communication design to be like almost all computerized on the web?
We do print work. It's usually for a client that we're also doing some kind of web work for. But we make like a book a year. Chris has been working on a series of pretty ambitious books for the Tang Museum, and there's nothing particularly digital about those books. They are part of a grant that the Tang Museum got, which also includes some work we've been doing on their website, and it's thematically related. It's about like their collection and also inclusion. But so yes, we do print work and signage. We're starting a project now. I think that is a website and identity and signage. And that's sort of part of all of our past experiences too. I think Eric sort of alluded to this. We really do like to back an identity out of user experience. So on a few occasions, like the ICALA, we've started with a website, and then someone's like, shouldn't we rethink the identity as well? And then we do, and you would think that that's the wrong order, but it's actually a great order because by then we've talked to all these stakeholders, and we have an idea, like I'm not at the shed, I'm going to the shed, I'm at the shed. That's an identity idea in a way. We did not do the shed's identity, but that kind of thinking backs really well out into sort of deep idea about brand or about identity. So that we're starting with digital, or that we're like versed in digital, I definitely think is an asset to how we think about other channels. Like advice for students, I would not pigeonhole yourself as a print designer. Do I think that print is like going away, or that signage is going away? Definitely not. We're definitely all going to be living in the real world, and that's a big part of our work too. We try to talk about is that these interfaces help you engage with physical stuff. So that's what also makes it really cool to sometimes design that physical stuff too.
You said that you all teach. How do your teaching practices inform your studio practice, if at all?
Yeah, a lot. Not all of us, but a lot of us, both designers and developers. I bet you guys would have different answers.
I think for me it's nice to do projects where there are no, or to at least guide projects where there aren't any rules to things, where because usually we have strengths which are good in real world projects, but I think the process of like being in the classroom and running critics or giving people feedback ends up coming back to like I pick up a lot from that process, I think. So for me, it's super exciting. Like I'm always like pretty excited after class always. So I think it's very rejuvenating somehow. But I think that process of teaching helps my like work practice quite a bit.
What would you say?
Well, for me, what's exciting is to learn about how the students nowadays, like, I mean, this is silly, but like, I don't really use social media that much, and it always comes up in projects a lot. So it kind of makes me think about it quite a bit through students' projects, and we try to talk about it, and I try to be supportive, and they kind of push me to learn more and try to help them how to use those interests in their projects. And also every so often, sometimes a student makes something like really unexpected, and that's really gratifying.
Yeah, a couple like disconnected thoughts for me. There's like a teaching component to our professional practice too. Which is when, first of all, like developers are learning new skills and teaching those to each other, and designers are learning new tools and teaching those to each other. And also when we're training our clients to use our systems. And that makes me think that like there's a little bit of a parallel to creating a system that's kind of a blank slate for staff to populate, or it's bug or it's shrub for users to make something out of nothing. There's an analogy there to creating a brief in a class, and we do often use the word brief for ourselves, at least, that in that first phase of work, which we call the discovery phase in our contracts, when we're researching this institution and spending time there and understanding what all their pain points are and what needs to be improved and what functions does this new system need to accomplish. What comes, and also what sort of thematics are there? What are the tensions? Like the Shed being this billion-dollar organization that also needs to appeal to everybody, or being this really, really heavy structure that weighs thousands of tons that also seems to want to drive around, and that at the end of that process of like discussion and observation, we produce a brief actually for ourselves, which kicks off like the design phase of the project and the user experience phase of the project. So that definitely follows a kind of we're not the only ones to work that way, but that follows a little bit of an academic process too. I guess the last thing I would mention is that like I'm trying to convince my students at Yale to adopt sort of a UX process for the last couple of years, where they're wireframing, they're thinking about user journeys, and the reason is so that they might be able to innovate, not in what they're making, like not that they're making new designs that we would steal or that would have any commercial value necessarily, but rather that they might think about some of those deliverables or some of those phases of work in new ways that no one has thought about before, or come up with new formats, not for the final object, but new formats for the process. And so I think students have a lot to contribute there, ideally.
All right, I think teaching is a great way to finish. Thank you so much for teaching at Parsons as well. And then thank you so much for sharing your projects. And then some of you, it was great to hear some of the thoughts that went into those projects, and then also learn more about your studio and then the people, and then how you're kind of center of this community. So thank you so much.
Thanks very much.